All right, let's dive into one of the most elegant and, frankly, one of the most clinically vital topics in all of physiology, acid-base balance. We're not just going to memorize a bunch of rules today. We are going to build, from the ground up, a deep, mechanistic understanding of how the body manages this absolutely critical equilibrium. Now, this channel is all about examining the evidence and the physiology that underlies our everyday clinical practice. The goal here isn't just to prep for an exam, it's about getting to a genuine understanding. The kind that actually improves patient care. And while AI-generated videos can be a good starting point, they often lack the nuance and critical appraisal we need. But we don't have to worry about that today. We are going to be learning this physiology from one of the giants in the field, Dr. John B. West, whose contribution to pulmonary physiology just cannot be overstated. So why is this such a core topic for anyone in pulmonary and critical care? Well, just look at the sheer scale of the problem. Your body's metabolism produces this staggering amount of volatile acid in the form of CO2. We're talking around 10,000 milliequivalents every single day. Now, compare that to the kidneys. They handle the fixed acids, sure, but that's only about 100 milliequivalents a day. This just brilliantly illustrates that the lungs are, by a factor of 100, the dominant organ in daily acid-base regulation. It's not even close. Okay, let's start with the fundamental chemistry. Everything, and I mean everything, that follows is built upon this one elegant system. So what is a buffer? You can think of it like a chemical sponge. It's a substance that can reversibly grab onto hydrogen ions, soaking them up to prevent these wild swings in pH. And while there are other buffers, like hemoglobin, the undisputed star of the show in our blood is the bicarbonate buffer system. It's really a two-step process. First, CO2 combines with water to form carbonic acid. Now, the key player here is an enzyme called carbonic anhydrase. It's packed inside our red blood cells, and it makes this reaction happen incredibly fast. Without it, in the plasma, this reaction is just glacially slow. Then, in step 2, that carbonic acid, which is really unstable, immediately falls apart into a hydrogen ion and a bicarbonate ion. This right here, this is the core reaction you have to master. And from these simple chemical reactions, we can derive the single most powerful tool we have for understanding acid-base physiology, the Henderson-Hasselbalch equation. And there it is, it's the law of the land. It mathematically links our three key players, the pH, the bicarbonate concentration, which you can think of as the metabolic or kidney component, and the partial pressure of CO2, which is our respiratory component. The pK is just a constant for this system, it's 6.1. And that 0.03, that's the solubility coefficient for CO2. Now, watch how beautifully this works. If we just plug in the normal physiological values, a pK of 6.1, a bicarb of 24, and a pCO2 of 40, we can calculate the ratio of bicarbonate to dissolved CO2. It comes out to 24 over 1.2, which is a perfect 20. The log of 20 is 1.3. You add that to our pK of 6.1, and what do you get? A pH of 7.4. It works perfectly every time. Okay, so we've got the governing equation. Now let's turn it into a picture. The Davenport diagram is an incredibly useful map for plotting and really understanding these acid-base disturbances. So let's get our bearings on this map. On the y-axis, we've got plasma bicarbonate. On the x-axis, we have pH. And those curved lines running across the diagram, those are lines of constant pCO2. We call them isoplaths. Each one is basically a plot of the Henderson-Hasselbalch equation for a specific pCO2. And notice, as you move from left to right, the pCO2 values get lower. The second critical piece of this map is this straight line right here, the blood buffer line. Now, this is an experimentally derived line. Just imagine you take a sample of normal blood in a test tube and you just change the pCO2 it's exposed to. This line shows exactly how the pH and the bicarbonate would change in response. So it represents a pure, uncompensated respiratory disturbance. And its slope, by the way, is determined by the blood's non-bicarbonate buffering capacity, which is mostly hemoglobin. All right, we have our equation and we have our map. It's time to apply this toolkit to the 4 primary acid-base disturbances we see in our patients. Okay, let's start with respiratory acidosis. The primary problem here is alveolar hypoventilation. Maybe it's a patient with an opioid overdose or severe VQ mismatch. Whatever the cause, they aren't blowing off enough CO2, so their pCO2 rises. Now, because this is a pure respiratory change, our starting point on the diagram moves up along the blood buffer line. Notice that as the pCO2 goes up, the pH falls, but the bicarbonate also rises just a little bit. That's a direct chemical consequence of the reaction we just talked about. Now, the body hates a change in pH, so it fights back. Over hours to days, the kidneys start to compensate. They begin to retain bicarbonate to buffer that extra acid. This is a metabolic compensation. And on our diagram, it moves our point up along that new higher PCO2 isopleth. And as you can see, this action brings the pH back towards normal. But it's really crucial to remember this. In the body, this compensation is almost never complete. Now for the opposite scenario, respiratory alkalosis. Here, the primary problem is alveolar hyperventilation. Maybe it's driven by anxiety, or perhaps it's the hypoxic stimulation you get at high altitude. The PCO2 falls. So on our diagram, this is a move down the blood buffer line to a lower PCO2 isopleth, and that results in a higher pH. And again, the kidneys will step in to try and correct this. They'll start to excrete bicarbonate. This metabolic compensation moves the point down along that new lower PCO2 isopleth. And what does that do? It pulls the elevated pH back down towards the normal range. Let's switch gears to the metabolic disorders. In metabolic acidosis, the primary problem is either a gain of a fixed acid, think diabetic ketoacidosis or lactic acidosis, or a primary loss of bicarbonate itself. This process consumes bicarbonate, so the initial move on our diagram is straight down, along the starting PCO2 isopleth to a lower bicarbonate level and therefore a lower pH. Now, the compensation here is respiratory and it is fast. The peripheral chemoreceptors sense that low pH and they drive ventilation. The patient starts to breathe faster and deeper to blow off CO2. This lowers the PCO2 and moves our point to the left, along a new blood buffer line that's parallel to the original one. This brings the pH back up, providing a partial but very rapid compensation. And finally, metabolic alkalosis. The primary cause here is a loss of fixed acid. The classic example is vomiting from pyloric stenosis or gain of bicarbonate. The initial change is a move straight up the PCO2 isopleth to a higher bicarbonate level and a higher pH. Now, the respiratory compensation for this, which would be hypoventilation, is often pretty minimal and frankly unreliable because the drive to breathe is just far too complex. So we've mapped out all the systemic disturbances. But why? Why does the body defend pH so fiercely? Well, it all comes down to the cellular level, and specifically the delivery of oxygen. Now, this is a really fascinating slide because it shows a stark contrast in scale. In the lung, oxygen only has to diffuse a tiny distance, just a few microns, from the alveolus into the red blood cell. But out in the peripheral tissues, let's say in a working muscle, the distance from the capillary to the most distant mitochondrion can be absolutely vast in comparison. We're talking on the order of 50 microns. This distance, this is the critical bottleneck in the whole system. And this gets to the central point. The reason your arterial PO2 is around 100 mmHg isn't because the mitochondria need that much oxygen. In fact, they can function perfectly well at a PO2 of just 2 or 3. No, that high arterial PO2 exists for one reason and one reason only: to create the partial pressure gradient, the driving force that's required to push oxygen across that long diffusion path in the tissues to finally reach the mitochondria. It's all about overcoming a physics problem. Thank you so much for your time. I really hope you found this useful. Medicine is just filled with these long-standing assumptions, and real progress begins when we start questioning them. So I encourage you to treat all sources with a healthy skepticism and really take the time to review the source material for this explainer in Dr. West's classic textbook of pulmonary physiology.